and welcome to this special episode of the Beyond Room 313 Symposium. Myself, Timoney, Thomas are here with a very special guest, Brad Olsen. Brad, how are you doing today?
Doing great, guys. Thanks for having me back. Always really enjoy our conversations.
Awesome. I was really glad to have you here, and we're especially glad to have Brad back. This is our third episode of the Symposium with Brad. This one's going to be an extra special one today. Topics that are kind of near and dear to a lot of people's hearts and minds out there. We're going to discuss one of our favorite subjects, which is aliens and extraterrestrials and interdimensional beings. So, Brad, you're over here on the west coast of the United States as well, too, right?
West Coast, but I'm right now traveling eastbound. I'm in Mountain Time in Salt Lake City, Utah, currently doing a couple-day trip to Park City this week, and then moving on down to Sedona the following week and speaking at a conference over the spring equinox and watching gas prices shoot up every time I go to the pump. It's crazy. It's hyperinflation is now setting in.
Absolutely. Going over to Sedona, are you going to speak at, you said you're speaking there or working on a project there?
Yep. It's called the Sedona Ascension Retreat. I think it's sold out, but they released some tickets last week if they're still available. But it's SedonaAscensionRetreats.com. Yeah, I'm one of the speakers, really great lineup. If there are tickets available, you can use the promo code Brad Olsen 10 to get 10% off. And that's one word and 2 numerical digits. But should be cool. Yeah, great to be in Sedona. If you guys ever been there, it's beautiful country, Red Rock Canyons. And boy, talk about UFO stuff. I can bring up all there is around Sedona, the dark and the light. And I think that's something we should emphasize on the show, that there's goodies and baddies. There's service to self and there's service to other entities. And there is duality in this universe. And even in a place like the Red Rock Canyons of Sedona, there's some darkness there. And we'll talk about that when we get to it.
Yeah. I'm real curious to hear what you have to say about that, especially because I kind of want to start off this symposium talking about like the commonly agreed upon consensus reality about what UFOs, extraterrestrials, and those phenomena are. It used to be such a fringe topic that only the nerds and strange people were into, but nowadays it's like the normies and everyone has their theories about aliens. So we'll kind of start off there, and maybe you could talk about the Sedona connection to UFOs, if you know the culture about UFOs around there, and then kind of get into some of that duality that you're talking about there. That within this universe there is duality, and there is good and there is evil. And if you want to start off talking about the Sedona aspect of it a little bit.
Sure. Well, I think it's important we should always define our terms before we get into sometimes thorny topics and issues, especially when it relates to some of the dark sides related to the extraterrestrial question. So extraterrestrial, that right there is kind of a loaded term because we're always conditioned to think, oh, look to the skies, the ships are coming down. They're extra from another terrestrial system. Interesting how we've been programmed that way, but not to think of the interterrestrials that could be right here on Earth and that could have a connection with all the deep underground military bases and a human element, human trafficking as well. What's out of sight is out of mind, especially down below in some of these very deep underground military bases. That's an acronym for DUMBs. And the subject that I find really fascinating that probably should get more attention are the ultraterrestrials. Those are the entities that can phase in and out of reality. Our dense third dimensional reality here. But I was just corresponding with a journalist in Israel, and she's very interested in the subject, trying to define the terms. And quite simply, that there are these goodies and the baddies. And that also applies to terrestrials of this archonic network. The baddies are of this type. They have been an infection here on planet Earth. And please do contribute to this, you guys, because I respect your opinion so much. I'd love to hear what you think of all this, and let's have a conversation about it. But ultra-terrestrials come from this lower fourth dimensional reality in the archonic network. And as you said in the setup, Jason, it could be accounted for the jinn of lore, could be even leprechauns and elves and all the little supernatural creatures in folklore that come of this, Thomas. And I'm sure you have some great insight on that coming from Ireland. So if we look at it as extraterrestrials coming in, interterrestrials from below, and ultraterrestrials that may have abilities that we're still trying to wrap our heads around. And there may be so many of these too, because science tells us we live in a multidimensional reality, all the way up to 13 dimensions. So you can imagine how populated these other worlds can be, totally out of view, the unseen realms to us that we can only do certain things to conjure their images up and to see them. It's interesting that in occult practices, what do? They conjure demons and cast spells and bring things out, as you mentioned, the scrying mirrors and crystal balls and things like that. So that is summoning these lower fourth dimensional entities. Once you get up to the fifth dimension and above, then you're in a realm of love and the higher emotions that humans feel, that these entities are very parasitic, some of them in this lower fourth dimensional realm, and prey upon humans in many different ways, not just physically, but it could be energetically. So to take you to Sedona and some of the dark side, there are reported bases there, including what has been human trafficking, what has been a lot of the experiments we've heard taking place in some of these domes. And there have been so many sightings in Sedona. One of my good friends, Reverend John Polk, he's also going to be at the conference. We're doing UFO sky watches every night, and he's got a dozen or so of these night vision goggles. I'll tell you guys, he has never refunded a single person, and his guarantee is you will see one or your money back. And it's up there every single night. So if you just have a little technology to use, sometimes these other dimensions can be seen. They can be the seen realms, even though we call them the unseen realms, including what we can do with our cameras. Oftentimes when you get these pictures and there's orbs everywhere and all sorts of artifacts that are really inexplicable, how can we make sense of our interceding on behalf of these ultra-terrestrial realms? And that's what I find so interesting these days, is looking into including history and the gods and the goddesses and the powers they had. And sometimes they could just phase through walls and disappear. Well, this is the same discussion we're now having with aliens and grays being able to walk right through a wall. And many abductions, people have stated that. So that's Sedona and the three kinds of alien species intelligences too. If you think about ultra-terrestrials, that they don't even necessarily always have to have a body, that they could be a certain kind of intelligence. And that's what Carlos Castaneda said about these archonic entities, that they were these mental parasites that actually fed off of a human's fear and suffering. And they even called it Luch, that it's a food to them to have people in this fearful state. And look at what's going on around the world, man. You couldn't have manufactured a better fear type scenario amongst people right now. So I see a lot of things that are happening in the world as by design. And then you look at these other unseen realms, you got some entities that may be fanning the flames of dissension quite a bit through our history.
That's interesting that you use that term Luch, because if you're familiar with using with drinking absinthe, that's the term that they use for releasing the fairy, the spirit within the absinthe. So you get the green absinthe, and the cold water is trickled into it, and they call that the Luch. And then there's the spirit, the entity that's allegedly within the absinthe comes out, and it takes away the creativity of a genius poet and gives it to someone who's who's a not very good artist, I think is what the legend is with absinthe, where it's kind of like a reverse muse, where it takes away the creativity of someone and gives it to something else. So that's just interesting that term Luch is used both, you're saying as some sort of like a parasitic kind of attachment to a human entity, right?
Food source.
Food source. Yeah.
Energetic food source.
Yeah. And that's what I do wonder what goes on with a lot of these people who are, people who call themselves contactees or who are out there communicating with these entities and other, what they'll call other dimensions. Are they actually communicating with something that is making an attachment that is feeding off of their psychic energy by the connection to it, whether it's through entheogens or through something else? If they're going out there and connecting with these entities, if they are some sort of trickster that goes out there and just that communication itself is what's, feeding off of them. So Thomas, I know you have a tremendous amount of knowledge and wealth of knowledge and wisdom about this topic of the fairy folklore. And I kind of wanted to get you to chime in here a little bit about this and the way that it connects in with what you're a real master of.
Well, I'll be like what you and Brad were saying. I grew up with the whole thing when I heard the term, extraterrestrial. My automatic assumption was, these guys from another planet in a spaceship up in the sky. And there was two game changers in that for me. Back in the day was when Whitley Strieber's book Communion came out, and then Jacques Vallées' book Passport to Magnolia. And both the Whitley Strieber Communion one is interesting because he didn't believe that there were aliens from another world. He called them the visitors. And that book was marketed by the publishers as an alien abduction book, but he was very specific that his experiences were very similar to people taken by the fairies within Celtic folklore. And also, the second book, Transformation, he really went into that deeply. And then Jacques Vallée came along and he showed how so many of the alien abduction stories and even the way they manifest and everything was very similar to Celtic and Nordic folklore regarding fairies and fairy folklore and being taken into the fairy world. One example was that Whitley Strieber and many abductees talked about the ramshackle, dirty and badly maintained nature of the inside of their craft. Well, in Celtic folklore, they would always refer to the fact that fairyland is like this world, but it's very poorly managed. If the farms are badly looked after, the livestock are not well, the houses are very poor quality, their clothes are poor quality, and they have a resentment for human beings who are living a much better standard of lifestyle. So it's kind of very interesting. Another big one for me was, in a Theosophist magazine, this must be 20 odd years ago, I read an article that was about Rudolf Steiner's obsession with a book called Virlia, The Coming of the Power Race. This book was written in 1870 and it was about this group called the Virlia who lived inside the earth and had a power called Vril. And he said Steiner believed the story was so plausible that it had to be rooted in fact. And that ties in what Brad was saying about the inner earth and what's going on down there. Yeah, it's a massive topic. It's unfortunate that it's so often, it's more than often pigeonholed in the simple world of like spacemen, space beings, whatever. Because I think it's a topic that opens up a lot of understanding, not just for Fortean researchers. It does really. It expands your world into whole other aspects of like the things like the Wetiko and these energy parasites, which is totally something, things like Ouija boards attract these low-level entities that tell you that you're Aunt Mary or something like that, when in reality it's a demon feeling off your emotions and this kind of thing. And at the same time, we have this amazing world of exploring these subjects. And it's still narrow when you see ancient aliens and shows like that on TV. Unfortunately, as good and well made as those shows are, they tend to be a bit pedestrian when it comes to expanding the bandwidth of what these beings might possibly be in all their forms. And I think that's where folklore really comes into its own in this topic.
I wanted to riff off of what you were saying there, Thomas, about the fairy realm and it all being disheveled and run down and beaten down. And I think, Brad, you might have something to bring into this as well. That I do wonder, one of my theories is if these entities, whether they are jinn, fairies, aliens, whatever you want to call them, but these ones that have that kind of fucked up realm, if their whole intention of being here and communicating with people is to take that template that exists in their world and have us mock it up here, have people in this realm mock it up. So as we've seen, like over time, it's kind of like architecture And the way of living that we have in this world is becoming more and more like that fairy realm, or like the alien realm, where things have become incredibly disheveled and run down, and we've got weird political things going on with communism and constructs that are just kind of alien to the way that we do things around here. Like socialism and communism doesn't exist anywhere in nature. Yes, tribalism exists in nature, and people will try to say that tribalism and communism are the same thing, but no, it's a philosophical concept that doesn't have its correspondence within nature and this reality. However, I think it might have some sort of correspondence to the reality that these beings come from. And whether it's the jinn, who allegedly have been here longer than us, right? They like to say that this was their reality before it was ours, which again, I think might be part of their bullshit tricksterism, that they're using that as a, if there's some sort of invader from another realm, they would obviously try to use some sort of social engineering to say, oh, no, we were here first. You guys are visitors in our realm, turning that thing around. So I wanted to know what maybe both of you think about that idea that they could be trying to create their world within this world in order to kind of set it up and terraform it, if you want, psychically terraform it to be a place for them to take over. They wouldn't be showing up in nuts and bolts spacecraft, shooting at things or doing the War of the Worlds tripod thing, but they could be slipping in between dimensions and just manifesting their reality around us right now.
Yeah. Well, I'll take a crack at that. Remember the old saying that the greatest trick the devil ever played on us was to make us believe he didn't exist. Well, what if the devil takes on all these different personas and different names, and is the devil, and is Satan, and is Lucifer, and is the Green Man, and is all these different, throughout history in many different religions and cultures, the bad guy who's always been vexing the humans, including the dragons that came out of this cave, and our brave St. George went and slayed the dragon. And isn't it interesting that in China, things about the dragon, the hills are the dragon's lair, and the Great Wall of China is quite like the dragon. Then when you consider secret societies and maybe what they might have conjured up, like this 19th century image of the Knights Templar, who then had to go underground after they were crushed by the King of France and the Pope at the time, but came out, reemerged as Freemasonry in Great Britain, the York Rite and the Scottish Rite, some of the first Freemason organizations to go above ground. Well, what if they had some information or some ways to conjure up these entities for their advantage, for the globalist advantage? And you mentioned early about John Dee and his ability to protect the Queen during a time when Spain was very powerful and was about to invade England. And he famously told Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, the young lady who had assumed power, and this blossoming of culture in England at the time. It was also the time of Sir Francis Bacon, Shakespeare, and you had the great sailors at sea exploring the New World, such as Sir Francis Drake. But John Dee was a magician, and his crystal ball is still on display in his scrying mirrors in the British Museum and elsewhere, I understand. Love to go back there and check those out. But he famously advised Queen Elizabeth, don't attack. They were about to unleash their fleet from the UK and confront the Spanish Armada. Don't attack. And then on the third day, when they were right about to make a beachhead, a ferocious storm came through and washed them away. So ever since John Dee, he was the first occult intelligence source to the royalty, which then became governments. And in the UK, that's MI5 and MI6 more especially. In the US, the USA, and the NSA. And the NSA was formed with the specific task of all intelligence and operations that had to do with extraterrestrials. That was the original reason NSA, which for a long time the acronym was no such agency, because nobody in government would even admit they existed. And they were working on Blue Book, which is all the information compiled the red book as well. I should say blue book. Anytime you hear the word blue, that refers to extraterrestrials. So we've heard of Project Bluebeam, the fake alien invasion, and Blue Book is studying the extraterrestrial, but nothing ever conclusive ever comes. That's what's so interesting. Even in this day with videos and so much else.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, they don't want to give it away to us.
I don't believe they know themselves. I think that it's just much a mystery to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you were saying, Brad, about the John Dee stuff. I've got an interesting story on that. About 6 weeks ago, I was actually at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford with the expressed thing of getting over there and seeing and filming his magical implements. It's a fantastic museum. I like it even better than the British Museum. Guess what? They were missed. They're gone. They're not on display anymore. And I asked the curator what happened to them.
Way.
Oh, they've been moved away. And I said, where'd they go? And he goes, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, like, who has them? Who has them now? You know, the kind of thing. That was the first thing that popped into my head was like, who has them, right? You know, it's and they were on display in that museum for years and years and years, and now they're gone.
Yeah, somebody's using them.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Interesting. Or maybe they activated themselves.
Yeah.
Or something.
I think someone in power. Well, I think these are magical technologies. These were the computers and the spaceships of their time. You travel dimensions. Him and Kelly brought Mandini through the scrying glass from another dimension. She was probably a djinn, perhaps. This is a common thing. So this was, people look at these things and call them hocus pocus, but these were actual technology using things like obsidian and crystal. And you even think of things like a Nokian as a kind of a computer script language. This is exactly what they were doing, was technology like ours, but in a different way. And in many ways more successful than the stuff we actually use, because they were actually contacting and communicating with these extraterrestrials that, you know, NASA is still trying to find, and other groups, the European Space Agency, still stick a dish in the sky hoping to hear something. And that's not how you contact them.
Yeah, we've talked about that before. It's the wrong people trying to do these processes. They don't look at it with any sort of magical intent. They're just looking for something physical.
Yeah.
And I bet that these agencies, whether it's the NSA or MI5, MI6, are probably out there actively recruiting people who have natural ability to scry and natural ability to have these cities, you know, the Sanskrit term cities, whatever it is, these psychic abilities are latent within people. And that's probably, they don't know, but they're out there recruiting people like Jack Parsons and Ron Hubbard and Aleister Crowley and these people who just, John Dee and Ed Kelly, all these people who have natural ability to go into these other realms, whether it's through, you know, the use of a scrying mirror or, you know, people can do it like the remote viewing stuff. It's the same kind of thing. You know, they're going out there and looking for these gestalts within remote viewing, like these images, and there's different techniques and technologies that remote viewers use. But those are just outside, like the mirror itself and the sketches that the remote viewers do. Those are all just vias. Those are all just tools to get something that's already within the magician, already within the remote viewer, to go within themselves so they can tap in. Like a scrying experience we had the other evening kind of revealed that, you know how there's like all these kind of new age people who say that like everything is all connected and we're all, you know, there's all that like beautiful artwork out there with sacred geometry that shows like all these human beings and they're all interconnected with these toroidal fields and stuff. And people will look at that and see that, oh yeah, like reality all around us is all connected. And there's like this internet of communication that goes between each human being and everything's all one. It's like, well, the way I described it is I use the analogy of it's like a band being on stage and there's all these instruments. There's a drum set, there's a guitar, there's a bass, there's some vocal microphones, and those are all individuals all plugged into one mixer. And just because everything's plugged into one mixer doesn't mean that the reality is all one big mass. It's like there are people that can unplug themselves from that mixer and go off and form their own band and create a own reality over here. The way that magicians will do, they'll realize like, oh, you can unplug yourself from that and go create an entirely new mock-up over there with a different mixer. So it's just this thing of like, a lot of people will go in there and see that, oh yeah, there's this interconnected nature of life and everything is all one. It's like, no, they're looking at the nuts and bolts astral connections that exist between human beings and all entities on the planet. And yeah, there are those psychic connections, but those can be severed and tapped into other realities. The magician can go in there and unplug from that mixer and plug themselves into a different mixer and play an entirely different song. Brad, like you're saying, there's these different layers. Some people will say there's 30 of them, the 30 Enochian Aethers, or, you're saying that there's 13. There's people out there who have all these different numbers for how many there are. We'll just say arbitrarily there are X number of other realities, and maybe some of those can be created. Maybe some of those, like an egregore, an agreed upon reality can be created, and multiple people can go into that created reality. Unplug from the mixer of the current paradigm and plug themselves into a different mixer that they created themselves. So I think that's what goes on there with the remote viewing, with scrying, is that there's this tapped into, like analog mixer that instruments can be plugged into. And you can go in there and communicate with that, but you can also unplug from it and go somewhere else and plug into that reality. Or people will use the radio dial analogy on an analog radio. Like there's the different frequency bands across it, and you tune the crystal to switch over into a different reality construct. And some people latently have that ability with them, and others, they're just born tuned into whatever it is, 100.1 on the dial, and they can only see that because whatever psychic censorship is in there to censor out any incredible phenomena, it just gets attenuated away. And all that they can do is be tuned into that one frequency.
Speaking of MI5, David Shaler wants to come on the show. I know him, so he's a former MI5 agent. We'll have to get him on here and grill him on these topics.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how they do that recruiting process. Are they using remote viewers to recruit, or you know what I mean? How are they doing that? I'm really interested.
Well, I can add some insight on that. There's from the time of Ingo Swann, who is a very famous remote viewer, he was recruited by the intelligence agencies to spy on the Russians. And they had their own third eye spies, just like the movie and the book. These guys are all coming out now. And so to answer your question, Timoney, the common denominator is they were recognized as children as having exceptional abilities. Some of them were even taken and brought into the programs as children, such as Tony Rodriguez. He had quite some stories to tell, and he's just come out with his new book about being on the Planetoid series. Plug for his book. And he's got a lot of experience as a psychic as a child, and many of them will say that. And so then they were made aware that there's these programs, and then some of them as adults not only participated in them, but helped to write the protocols for other remote viewers to use, including Michael Jaco, who in his book Intuitive Warrior describes how they used their psychic abilities to, for example, in his case, he was out in the field in Iraq. He could tell moments before that there could be a attack on their convoy or their vehicles. And he lived to tell his story where others did not. And he was often criticized sometimes. But then when they realized he's got a pretty almost stellar batting record for predicting this kind of stuff, the military is very much involved. Russell Targ also speaks at conferences. I met him at Contact in the Desert. He too is Third Eye Spies, which is the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, is based on those experiences. So they really did have a team of psychics who were spying on the Soviets just as they were on us. But the end conclusion is it's coming into the age of transparency to begin with, so there are no secrets that can really be held anymore. I mean, these psychic avatars, as they really are doing this remote viewing in the most sensitive environments on Earth, at nuclear power plants, in weapons manufacturing, in the dumps, and coming back and reporting on some incredible things. At the time, we were unbelievable. Just also want to your point, Jason, about crystals and transmitting. The very first radios use crystals. and I do have a chapter on that in this Beyond Esoteric book, that this is on display in Japan at the NHK Broadcasting Museum in Tokyo, Japan. So all cell phones, televisions cannot work without crystal.
No.
Oh yeah, all the stone
of,
circles.
Yeah,
all the stone circles, like this statue behind me, which is like, God knows how many thousand years old in Ireland. They're all loaded with quartz seams. They're communication devices.
Mm-hmm.
They're absolutely for some kind of. You cannot find one that doesn't have quartz in it somewhere. The ancient people knew that quartz was some kind of medium for communication. There's no doubt about that. And that's how it ended up in crystal radios. It's the most remarkable thing. Like, I studied electronics for 1 year in college, and it's the most remarkable thing when you actually have just a regular crystal and you can tune in radio stations on it just by attenuating the power that's going through it. And it's just a piece of rock, clear piece or clear white. But it's the most remarkable thing. And the clearer it is, the more quality the reception is, the higher the bandwidth is. They used to actually scour prisoner war camps in World War II to stop the British and American prisoners from finding crystals in the yards and stuff, because they were able to make radios from them and listen to Allied broadcasts. That's how powerful a crystal is. With very little, you can actually get a radio signal from a crystal. Very, very little. Literally a coil of wire and a rudimentary speaker that you can make yourself with a diaphragm. You can actually pick up radio messages from a piece of stone. And the ancients knew this, absolutely. Yeah, no doubt.
Brad, what you were saying about different places on Earth being sensitive, like around nuclear power plants. We have Hanford that's here just less than 20 miles away from here. And I remember growing up as a kid, and you can ask anybody that lives here in the Tri-Cities, whether they're a sensitive person or just a regular normie, people will tell you that this is just a very weird place. There's a lot of weird phenomena that happens here. People's their psyches are very strange. And I always had this thought to myself when I was growing up, because there was a lot of weird shit that happened when I was growing up, and who I grew up with. One of them had a very, very high security clearance where, we never really knew exactly what it was that he was doing. And I had a lot of experiences of entities and things coming into my room, and loads of missing time. I used to sleepwalk a lot. I would, go to sleep in my room and wake up in really weird, fucked up places, and have absolutely no memory of how I'd gotten there. I woke up one time in a basement in a storage closet behind, these huge Tupperware boxes that had dog food and shit in it. Like, what? I was like 12 years old. I was like, well, I think I was a little bit older for that one, but yeah. So I don't know. I always wondered about that. I remember having psychic abilities and shit when I was really, really little, before my mom got married and, we moved here. But so I always wondered if that was more, if it was a recruiting thing or more of a thing to shut somebody down.
Well, you're just upriver from the East Eddy Ranch.
Yeah.
And the James Gilliland's complex there overlooking Mount Adams. I was there a couple summers ago, and I'll tell you guys, boy, you're only 100, maybe a little more miles away. It is one of the biggest paranormal hotspots on the West Coast. That Mount Shasta, countless sightings in and out. And James Gilliland's there with his high-powered lasers, and he's pointing them out, and you can see them with the naked eye, even more night vision goggles. But he'd be pointing at some of these lights coming in and out of Mount Adams, and he would say, our consciousness can even interact with them.
Oh, yeah.
And he would say, power up for us, power up. And these things would explode in light. I mean, I can't explain it any other way than it is having an interaction with us down on the ground. And I even went hiking up Mount Adams to about the tree line around 10,500 feet, so I could look over this west-facing slope of Mount Adams. And I call it the zone of silence, because there is no human activity. There is nothing back there. There are just walls of lava and very, very spiky. They'll cut your boots up. They're so sharp. Leather or lava back there. So when people say, oh, you saw headlights or a camper's flashlight or a snowmobile headlight, I could say, no way. I look back there. So I asked James when I came back from there and described it to him. I said to James Gillen, has anybody ever gone back there to see this origin or source of the lights? And he said, yeah, there was a guy a couple of years ago. And he went out for a few days and he got back there and camped a couple nights and got closer and closer to where he thought was going to be this entrance, which he described as a large garage door in a way. And when he finally turned a corner and got in view, he just had this incredible forbearing that he had to leave right there. And he literally ran back. He felt like his head would explode if he stayed any longer. And in exasperated mood, he went to James and said, finally, when he got it out of him, that he did see this garage door, this massive entranceway. And you can use holograms to disguise it, but an entity had come out to basically warn him to leave right then and there. So there are places like that in the world where believe it or not, even on near population centers such as Mount Adams and Seattle and Portland are only a couple hundred miles away, there can be massive volcanic underground chutes. Same with Mount Shasta, which goes down miles and it has so many interconnected channels. There's good ones and there's bad ones and there's humans all down there. So this is when it starts really getting complicated, because being near some of these places, not only will you have these sightings, but you can have interactions like you, Timoney, and maybe they identified your psychic abilities, and the energetic nail that stands up, it's hammered back down here on prison planet Earth. It's hard for psychic people. And I have anonymous people come up to me all the time at conferences and say how difficult it is to have psychic abilities on Earth, because they just get hammered from so many different ways.
And that's the thing.
This is what we're talking about. This is the ultra-terrestrials, this is the baddies that are out there too.
And that's the thing, like Brad, you're talking about the psychic nail that stands up, gets hammered. It's almost like, well, yeah, there's a lot of people with these cities with these, tremendous abilities that are the nail that gets hammered down. And then it's like they're the people who are strong enough, who, they don't get hammered down very easily. And I think those are the ones that get kind of noticed by people that, these people have had tremendous, just like initiation experiences. There's ordeals that these psychics and these magicians will go through. And it's like, okay, they can handle their shit. They can handle the kind of, because some people, that doesn't, just because they have the psychic ability within them doesn't mean necessarily that they're a robust human being that can handle the kind of security clearance or this kind of stuff that requires a top secret security clearance. They can't, they might not be able to handle some of the warfare things that these people are being used for with their abilities. So it's like the ones who actually are formidable psychics, they get noticed over time, noticed by both, the 3-letter agencies, but also probably by, whatever other entities are out there, whether the Enochian entities that people come in contact with when they're scrying the 38ers, or people will talk about whatever the secret chiefs, or these other, people talk about, you're saying higher level entities, where I think at that point, there are other beings out there. There are other, demigod forms that people can come into contact with. And it's like, there are the lower level ones that just feed off of people that, they're like the equivalent of kind of spiritual tweakers who go out there stealing copper out of people's air conditioners and stuff, and copper wire. It's like there are entities out there that are just like that. All they can do is go prowl through cars and steal shit. And then there are some higher level entities that do have kind of a vested interest in the game, so to speak, that they like creating things within physical reality. They don't necessarily have to take on a physical form, like you're using the term an avatar. Like they don't necessarily need to incarnate, but they do like playing in the physical universe and having humans, which are incarnate, kind of mock up their creations here. And I think that's how sometimes, Thomas, you were talking about Madimi earlier, this Jinn or whatever she was that did have some kind of vision about an empire, and that Dean Kelly brought that forward, and it was brought forth as the British Empire, and went out and was an entire reality construct that was mocked up on the planet. And perhaps that did come from some other entity that likes playing. If the Earth is like a game board, she liked playing. Yeah, Thomas, I see your finger. What's up?
British Empire. It's actually, and it's amazing when you read it, Empire.
Yep.
Kelly and Dee called it IMP, Empire. And
Yep.
we know an imp is a kind of a fairy type creature. And I always found that very interesting. And yeah, so, I mean, that's just amazing stuff. Brad, I want to ask you about Mothman, and the reason why, what you think he is because it's kind of like pertinent right now, because a lot of people don't know that the world's hotspot for seeing Mothman is not West Virginia, Point Pleasant. Well, that's where he got his name and developed his fame. It's actually around Chernobyl. There was Mothman sightings off the scale for years, and right during the middle of the Chernobyl reactor breakdown. And I'm just wondering we might have a flare up now again. What do you think about the Mothman thing? Do you have any opinions on that? Because I'm more and more becoming fascinated with it.
That's really interesting about Chernobyl. This is news to me, Thomas. Thanks for sharing that. Of course, I'm in the U.S., and so the Mothman sightings here are very, very interesting to me. These are two very cool pictures. One is of the Mothman there. And then what if sorcerers of old could conjure up these images now that we identify as gray aliens or reptilians, like that other picture I showed from a Freemason ceremony? And then this Mothman is now so famous in West Virginia at Point Pleasant, they put up a statue of him. And to me, it looks like the winged reptilian, and they are of the highest class, and they have white, scaly skin. They are basically the top of the totem pole. The hierarchy is very much from them down. They are Alpha Draco. That's who I would say is my most educated estimation of what the Mothman is. And of course, there are deep underground military bases in the Appalachia region of West Virginia that we've created. But I would say that Point Pleasant in particular is kind of like out in Dulce, New Mexico, an old legacy base, a base that has been there for a long time. And from time to time, these things make appearances on the surface. And for whatever they're doing, perhaps procuring people. These Draco reptilians have a taste for human blood. The Greys, and both of these entities are service to self aliens, need our fluids and cow fluids. Did you know that in a time of extreme emergency, it's not good for you, but it would keep you alive? That if there was no blood donors available, that cow's blood could be substituted for human.
Yep.
To keep you alive. And isn't it interesting that in the cattle mutilation phenomenon, one of the common traits of these dead animals that are found sometimes with broken branches below them and in the snow, no foot tracks around, just dropped out of the sky. Sometimes there's even a video I saw recently of a big male bull crashing through one of the feed barns with other cows, and they just gotta look up, bam, down this thing comes. But isn't it interesting that one of the common traits is all the red blood cells get sucked out, all the soft tissue gets cored out with laser precision. Oftentimes lips, eyes, other soft tissue areas get taken from these animals, as well as human abductions too have shown the similar type of what do they want from us? What do they want from these animals? They are a food source. And this blood, as I understand it, is put into a plasma-like state for the gray aliens, who then absorb it through their skin. They'll take this blood and other life form mixture, and that's how they eat, is through their skin. So this stuff is so strange, so weird, and freaks a lot of people out, anybody who has had an abduction experience. And then there's often the breeding program that could be going on that is producing hybrid human alien ET. This is also found in in the fossil record. Thomas, that was so interesting when you said you went to go see the scrying mirror and the crystal ball and the other stuff, and it got removed. I find the same thing when I go looking for the giant skulls and the evidence of the Lovelock culture. And I'd go in and talk to the curators, like, oh, you another one of those giant hunters? No, we don't have the elongated skeletons here they'll, of course, just dismiss me out of hand as, oh, you're another one of those conspiracy guys coming in to find the giants. Yeah, well, they're not around here anymore. So this censorship of all that is really important. In a way, they show it to us in certain ways, but then again, they retract it when we start getting a little hip, sending people to go see those implements that you found or any giant artifacts out here in the West.
That what you were saying about the ox blood, I've found those cattle mutilation stories very upsetting and very dark. When I first, even a kid, started reading about them in UFO books and magazines, I started to feel an instant sense of dread, that there was something truly wicked going on behind these draining of these animals. Now, an interesting aside to that, the Druids of the Celtic world used to use ox blood. They used to slaughter an ox and drink its flesh, its warm blood, and fall asleep under a tree in order to encounter other beings or travel into other dimensions. Now, that's one thing. And another thing, the cement that's used in the round towers of Ireland, which were not watchtowers, they've been shown by people like Phil O'Callaghan that they're definitely using they've got some kind of energetic force with them. The cement that's used to bind the stones is made with what? Ox blood. They use ox blood along with gypsum and lime mortar. So it just goes to show you there is something in that ox blood that perhaps is beyond even the ability of human. It also makes you wonder why all the bovine and bull cults all over the pagan world and even in India, why ox blood and the oxen is so central to world mythology. I mean, that's it's very spooky when you tie it in down with the cattle mutilation thing. You're dealing with some kind of technology that the other side are using against us.
I wonder if we're talking about crystalline structures and stuff. I wonder if there's something within the structure of ox blood and cow blood that is a good psychic attenuator to help tap into whatever other construct it is. Like Thomas, you're talking about how they would have the ox blood and then go dream and then have some sort of contact experience. So is there something to that blood that the structure of it is a better frequency attenuator? And the same thing, we were talking about quartz earlier. And then I've been wanting to bring this one up. Brad, you mentioned all the volcano tubes and everything with Mount Shasta and Mount Adams, Mount Rainier, all of that. And we're over here in the Tri-Cities too, where there's these incredible old lava flows. That it seems like wherever on the planet there are these volcano tubes, it also seems like there are naturally occurring magnetic anomalies, geomagnetic anomalies. And is that something there with those magnetic anomalies with the volcano tubes that allows there to be a better conduit between non-physical entities and the physical world? And that's why there's always, it seems like they put these power plants back in the day, they would put the stone circles. So it's always like these areas where there's these naturally occurring geomagnetic anomalies where these sites are built on. Makes me wonder here if the Hanford site was chosen back in the 1940s to be on one of these energetic nodes because it existed. It existed like we were talking about last time with the Kennewick Man, that there was some civilization here that had people at this nexus of these three rivers, and right up the road is the Hanford site. So this has always been a hot site, just like we were talking about Chernobyl being a hot site, Dulce Base being a hot site, Mount Shasta and all that. So is that something having to do with these magnetic fields and the ability if it's within the pineal gland or whatever it is in physiology, maybe it's one of the internal organs, but there's some sort of structure within the human body that has the ability to communicate and is more attenuated into other frequencies when one is around these magnetic anomalies. Like when we went over to David Omen's house last summer, there's a naturally occurring magnetic anomaly there that we tried to measure, but nonetheless, if we were able to measure it or not, we had strange psychical experiences there. Timoney was talking about how here in the Tri-Cities, there's these people that have these latent psychic abilities that, it gets real strange, but I've felt it since I've lived here. It's a very magical spot. And I would imagine that these nodes where they exist near volcanoes always seems to be, or any kind of ancient lava tube structure seems to be where there's these occurring magnetic fields. And that's got to be some kind of like superhighway between realities. And, makes me wonder if, we took these scrying mirrors to one of these hotspots and did, the call of the 30th call or whatever it is, the first call into the 30th aether, if we're to have more success here or someplace out where there's no energetic or geomagnetic anomalies, if people have better success while on top of some sort of naturally occurring geomagnetic anomaly.
Yeah, and Thomas, you can also address the ley lines and how most of the sacred places around the world can be found along these energetic lines. As far as volcanoes, also understand that the vast majority of UFO sightings by civilian people have been at, around, or above volcanoes. It's where I had my first sightings at Crater Lake in Southern Oregon. And then moments later, the same phenomenon of this light streaking into the depths of the mountain and the crater, both volcanic produced. So just imagine, not only is there a heat source at most volcanoes, but also these massive cavernous environments giving rise to the notion of an inner earth, different environments that intelligence beings can live in. Most of over 1 million people around Mexico City have seen UFOs over the volcano there, which is interestingly in a state of eruption, and they'll even see craft coming in and out, these big cigar-shaped craft during eruption. So clearly, if we're seeing them in this third dimensional reality, they have some way of moving through the extreme heat and the matter that is produced in a volcano. So once again, ultra-terrestrials, perhaps even in the spacecraft that they fly, do not apply the same kind of laws of physics as we know them on Earth. So a lot of that is subject to change as well once we start formulating interdimensionally. But Thomas, I'd love to hear what you have to say about the ley lines and the energetic magnetic properties of sacred sites.
Well, that's interesting you brought that up. The ley line thing is absolutely real. There's no doubt about that. And these energetic paths under the earth that flow like rivers are real. There's no doubt about that. And the building of ancient sites on them is very real as well. But I'll tell you something else. What you were saying about the Freemasons picking this stuff up, if there's one thing the Masons have really, really tapped into, it is using this geomancy, these earth lines and earth energies. And that's one of their biggest secrets. It's really being found out. There's a young lad here in Ireland who started making videos around Freemasonic sites on the east coast of Ireland. And at first he was a bit off the mark. As you do, you tend to see alignments everywhere. But I forget his name or his channel. I'll put a link in the comments below. But now he is batting 100. He's hitting targets, unbelievable things. He's finding incredible correlations between Freemasonic sites in Ireland and ancient stone circles and so on around Britain and Ireland, and even as far into France and across to Italy. And he's doing phenomenal work. And he's showing conclusively that the same paths and the same angles across the landscape were used by the Freemasons in this according to where ancient sites already were. So they absolutely knew this stuff. And of course, if they know it, like the US Navy knows it, the Russians know it, the Chinese know it. Well, that's feng shui and stuff like that. But I was talking to somebody in Sweden who was a fan of stone circles and barrows up there. And he says, you would not believe the amount of military bases built next to ancient sites in Sweden. So obviously the military around the world know this stuff too. And I bet it made big time in America.
Yep. Yeah, I know that I want to say in near Camp Pendleton in Southern California, there used to be a Rosicrucian temple or structure there that they had chosen that site in because of the naturally occurring amount of aether that occurred that collected in that area. And then right next to where that Rosicrucian, the former Rosicrucian temple is where they built Camp Pendleton. And I had some strange missing time experiences occur there at Camp Pendleton when I was in the Marine Corps. But yeah, absolutely. There's always these military bases that get put in or military installations even that get put in next to these ancient sites. So it's, there's something that people have been doing to draw these correspondences between these spaces, because it's just something tunes in the frequency greater around them. It's like being able to plug, you're like being able to screw a light bulb into the socket. There's just certain sockets on the planet where if you put the right technology there and screw it in, you'll have results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was nearly killed by being shelled, looking for it when I was a teenager, looking for a megalith in Ireland, and it was in a valley that the defense forces here used for testing their artillery range, and they put like green and red flags up, and I didn't know what the flags meant, and there was red flags, and all of a sudden I'm walking up the hill to see this megalith. It's famous for its ancient rock art, and I start hearing. And I've seen this black smoke appearing in the hills all around me. But it's like right in the middle of the military firing range was this spectacular megalith, from the Neolithic time with incredible rock art on it. And you see it's repeated. It seems to be a big thing everywhere.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder too if they do that to destroy some of these sites so that they're out of sight, out of mind to everyone else. They make bombing ranges out of them.
Well, the Turkish Air Force were actually, this is a pretty scandalous thing, about 5 years ago, were using this very ancient site that hadn't been properly explored, not far from Göbekli Tepe, were using it for actual missile tests with the Air Force. So unfortunately, yes, that does go on.
Yeah, just like the people who shot at the Sphinx back in, I forgot when that was, but we're using the Sphinx as target practice.
French. They used it for target practice, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to say I've heard stories too about contractors who won over during like OIF 1, OIF 2 era, mid 2000s that were in charge of taking artifacts and making them disappear. Going over into Mesopotamia there in Iraq, and going on contract gigs to make sure that things no longer existed, whether they were destroyed or taken, so that when people are out there exploring these parts of the desert that haven't had people in there for a long time, that they weren't running into any of these artifacts. But again, that's a theory. It's not something that's sound.
Okay, Brad, here's another one for you that I'm increasingly interested in. It might tie into the Men in Black thing. Are they walking among us disguised as humans?
I think the answer is yes, and have been for quite some time, and we just can't even recognize them. I just was reading my Nexus magazine newsfeed this morning, and one of the stories was about the tall whites who come out of Area 54, which is adjacent to Area 51, but a little bit closer to Indian Springs and even Las Vegas. And the story was by Charles Hall, who was one of the people assigned in the Army to station the post closest to them. And I've gone out there with my friends, and we've done sky watches, haven't seen any tall whites. But the story in Nexus and what Charles Hall reported was that they would enjoy coming into Vegas and walking amongst the casinos. And although they were taller than the average human and their eyes were much bigger, they would often wear sunglasses, and they did not like to be touched. Charles Hall relates the story of CIA would have to escort them. So they would keep a perimeter kind of thing. And there was an occasion when one of the older tall whites was, they're not quite native to our gravitational forces here on Earth. It's heavier for them. And so they walk slower, and it's pulling on them more than it does us. And so this older tall white was actually going up some steps, and he paused as he was getting the energy to keep going. And one of the CIA guys just wanted to give him a hand and grab arm to give him a lift. They did not like that. And he broke out the wand that we often hear the gray aliens carry, that have the ability to instantly put a person in a state of shock, and then they have to sit down or collapse. And that's what this alien did with this little bit to the CIA guy. And it created a bit of a spectacle there. And Charles Hall said there were witnesses that saw them. Among the ET species as well, grays have been seen at abduction sites. We talked about the Mothman that occasionally makes appearances. But I would say the ones that walk among us, Thomas, are the ones that look quite like us. And if you look at the depictions from Billy Meyer's Pleiadians to Syrians and Andromedeans, they are very human-like and could be walking down the street with us and we wouldn't even know it. So that's kind of where the whole subject of exopolitics and talking about aliens, it really blurs the line between us and them, because maybe we have part of their DNA in us. In fact, I do believe we do, including the reptilian brain right here in the back of our head, which for a long time people denied existed, but it's there for sure. It's there, and I'll show you a picture of it here in a second. But it is the fight or flight mechanism. So this is why humans can be rather combative sometimes, is because it's right in our brain to in this state. And there it is. If you want to know exactly where it's located, basically right at the spine, and we're them and they're us. So it really blurs the line, Thomas, about who is an alien walking among us and who isn't. Maybe we all are to a degree. And then you can also know by the Rh negative blood type in humans. Okay. And my family comes from Rh negative.
I was just going to ask you about Rh negative.
Where you can have incompatible blood. Maybe this is your time to talk about it, Timoney. But I had an uncle, Douglas, who died at 5 days old because his blood was Rh positive because my grandfather's was, but my grandmother was Rh negative, and it killed him. The only animal species on planet Earth that has the ability to kill its own offspring because of incompatible blood. So that shows you that there's differences among us there as well. And that we're interbreeding species here in many ways.
Yeah, I have Rh negative blood. And when I had my son, I had to get that shot, Rogam or whatever it is, that if I ever had any more kids, that my blood wouldn't attack them. So I'm glad you brought that up because I did want to ask you about that. But really quickly, I have a tall white story, and I've told it before, but I don't think I've told you. Years ago, like 10 years ago, I was living in a van, traveling across the country and just, doing hippie shit. And I ended up in Louisville, Kentucky. We hit the storm of the century in the middle of January, and we ended up getting stuck there for months. And so, we ran out of money and shit, had to get jobs, whatever. So in my first week of working at this health food store, this family-owned health food store, I didn't know anybody there. Nobody. I've never been to Louisville, Kentucky before. It was purely just a means of survival. I had to get a fucking job. So my first week there, I want to say it was like my third or fourth day. I was in the backstock area, and one of the other employees was like, "Hey, there's somebody out here that's asking for you." And I was like, "Okay, hang on, I'll be right there." I had to put down what I was doing, and he was like, "He's kind of weird." And I was like, "Okay, whatever." So I went out there and I was like, "Where is he?" And he was like, "I have no fucking idea." And I was like, "Well, what did he look like?" And he was like, "Well, he was like 7 or 8 feet tall, albino looking, and he asked for you by name." And it was only a couple of moments, like less than maybe 3 minutes that it took me to come out. And he was like, "He's fucking gone. Like, how does a person that looks like that just disappear?" And that was it. He was like, it's just kind of a smaller community of people who shop there. All the employees know, most of the customers and shit. So when, somebody comes in that they don't know, and then somebody comes in that looks like that they don't know, it doesn't go unnoticed. And he was like, "I've never seen anybody that looks like that, period. But I've never seen anybody that looks like that come in here. And he asked for you by name, and you've only been here for like 3 days." So I don't know. Maybe that's what that was. I've always thought about that. It was a really, really cool experience. I wish I would have fucking met him.
Your Rh negative blood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's your blood type there, Timoney. And also, did you know that almost all abductees are Rh negative blood type, as well as the royal families and the blue bloodlines? What do you think that all means? It's Rh negative. And you can't just marry into these families. They take their bloodlines very seriously. If you're in any way Rh positive, which over 85% of the humans are, they view them as quite inferior.
Right.
Blood type that does trace genetically the great apes and Darwinian evolution, man evolving up from the apes. There are elements of that in Rh positive people, but not in Rh negative. So it's even a better case to be made that those of us among us, Thomas, could be some alien blood type within us.
What you're saying about they breed amongst themselves. I was friends with this aristocratic guy when I was about 19, and his dad was actually an earl, and he was raised in a castle here, and he was a really cool guy, really nice guy, but he came from the aristocracy. I knew him, we became friends because we were both in the heavy metal scene in Ireland at the time, and so I became friends with him, but I didn't know he was an aristocrat until he told me, and we were talking, and he showed me a book that gets delivered to all the aristocrats every year. And what it is a picture of women the same age as him. And he has to pick his wife from one of the debutantes in this book. He cannot marry he'll be disowned by his family if he marries a woman that's not in this book that's delivered to all the aristocrats. I mean, that's like livestock breeding or horse breeding, but that's literally how they are.
Right.
Well, yeah.
That's heavy.
Yeah.
Literally on the arm.
Well,
Now you know.
Well,
wow.
they ain't getting none of that from me.
Right. Yeah. That's why I have a shotgun here.
Yeah.
But all right. Well, this last hour has flown by incredibly quickly. And before we wrap things up here, Brad, did you want to have any other things that you wanted to add to the conversation, or any of your new projects that you've got coming up that you wanted to share with our audience?
Well, I'm on the road right now, so it's kind of hard to work on the big projects. I'm kind of maintaining CCC Publishing. Michael Jaco's book is about to go to print, The Intuitive Warrior. So that'll be out this summer. And doing interviews, talking to great people like you guys, promoting new book, Beyond Esoteric, Escaping Prison Planet. And we'll be speaking in Sedona in a week and a half at the Ascension conference. And then I'm hightailing it back to California, and I got to get up to Mount Shasta for a conference in early April, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to be carrying my snow skis the whole time. Tomorrow here in Utah, because I want to catch the end of ski season in Lake Tahoe. There's a lot of really fun parties on the closing days, and know a lot of people up there. And so for the next month or so, I'm pretty much in travel mode, but I'm getting back into it. People want me to do videos, another one on the Presidio underground base there. And boy, that could be a whole show we could talk about sometime, what we know about underground bases. And again, these are subjects I think people really ought to know. And that's why I bring forth this whole 3-book series on esoteric subjects, because they're all chock full of the stuff we've been talking about tonight. And I've often believed that just people, if they have the information, they'll make the right decisions, and at least be knowledgeable about these other factors that have some influence in their lives. So that's what I bring forth at these conferences and through the books, and just to do my best to get the information out there. So thank you guys for having me on again. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you guys, and certainly enjoyed this hour and 15 minutes. But if people want to find more about me, bradolsen.com, some of the conferences I'll be speaking at for the rest of this year, and then cccpublishing.com. If anybody wants to get a signed copy, that's about the only way they can do it, through the website. So let's do it again sometimes.
Yes, we will.
Another month.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to go deeper next. We touched on it a little bit before, but I'm really interested in the Atlantis stuff now, big time. So we'll maybe do a special show on Atlantis at some point or something like that.
That sounds great. Yeah, let's do that again here soon in a few weeks. Brad will get you back again for Brad Olsen part 4 here on not on the Weekend Strange, but on the BR313 Symposium. So, Thomas, did you have any closing words you wanted to leave this episode with?
Yeah, well, that was it. Brad has to come back and talk about that. But yeah, thanks for coming again. It's just always great because I love the way these conversations go. And, best of luck on the speaking tours, and we'll see you next time you're around and available.
Thank you, Brad.
All right. Well, thank you,
guys. See you. We'll set up another number 4 and Do it
I
again.
love how we
Good
have a
talking to
running
you guys.
series.
Yeah, this is good.
Yeah.
So, and thank you everybody for tuning in here to this playback on YouTube. We'll definitely be having Brad Olsen back again for number 4, and we'll see you again next time for the Beyond Room 313 Symposium. Bye, everyone.